Good morning. I'm Ben Haygood from ILES, and along with Kim Scarborough with PSE&G, we'll be your moderators for this panel. It's our pleasure to welcome BPU President Christine Gould-Savoie and DEP Commissioner Sean LaTourette. Each of you will provide us with, we've asked you to be a lightning 5 minutes, but I think we've got a little bit of time, of opening remarks to reflect about the past 7+ years of the Murphy administration regarding climate and energy issues from both an emissions reduction and an adaptation and resilience perspective. What have we gotten right, and what should be the next to move the needle on these issues? I think we're going to start with President Gould-Savoie.
Great. I'll use this because I think that's protocol. I'm not sure I need it, but all right. Good morning. I think it's still morning. Nice to see you all. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk about the work of the Murphy administration, particularly around clean energy at the Board of Public Utilities. I see some current and former BPU employees in the audience, so it's nice to see you all. And I'm so glad to be here with my friend, Sean. So, you know, it's been a very exciting 7+ years in the administration for clean energy and climate action. I've been at the BPU since almost the beginning, although as a staff member in 2018. And I think we have done a tremendous amount to move the needle on clean energy policy in the state of New Jersey. You know, under the governor's leadership, we have advanced things like community solar, first in the nation, community solar program, which is incredible. Mike Winke can take a little bit of credit for that. He's here today, as well as Rachel Boylan, who's our attorney on solar. That has been, I think, a shining achievement of this administration, because it's not only about, right, community solar is not only about getting more clean energy onto the grid to help reduce our emissions and build our generation portfolio, but it's also about doing it in a way that is the most equitable and ensuring that people who, either for affordability reasons or because they don't have a roof that's appropriate, can take advantage of clean energy and lower their electric bills as a part of that program. So that's been really an incredible achievement. Throughout solar, we have been reducing costs since the signing of the Clean Energy Act. So the Clean Energy Act set us on a new path for the way that we incentivize solar and the development of new solar projects. So we really completely restructured our solar program so that we have a competitive solicitation for larger projects that has helped bring costs down dramatically for the cost of solar in New Jersey. And actually, our last competitive solicitation award last year was the cheapest solar that we've ever done in the state of New Jersey. So really incredible. And as a result of all of our work on advancing solar, this administration has doubled the amount of solar to over 5 gigawatts now of solar in the state of New Jersey. And that's just, I think, a really tremendous success, and also demonstrates our commitment to ensuring that we are continuing to develop such an incredible resource that's been both great for the environment and to help mitigate climate change, but also make sure that we are doing that in a way that's great for the economy of the state of New Jersey as well. Also, as a result of the Clean Energy Act, the BPU has been tasked with working with the utilities to reduce energy use through energy efficiency, right? Reducing electric and gas usage. And we're now in the second cycle of our energy efficiency programs. And just this week, ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, released their scorecard. And New Jersey, for the first time since 2006, was in the top 10. We were number 8, tied with 2006. I don't think Jean Fox is here for me to rub it in her face, but someone told me they think we should have been 7, which then I really would have taken some credit. But it's been the path towards getting into the top 10 since the beginning of this administration. We have moved up in those rankings, and that's not just about reducing emissions because we've saved energy. It's also about reducing costs. New Jersey was the most improved state for our energy efficiency programs. Our most recent cycle of energy efficiency programs saved $600 million for customers on their bills, and it will continue to save money as those customers have adopted those measures. So that's been an incredible success. I'm not gonna wrap up before I say the thing that everyone is the elephant in the room, and that is offshore wind. Yes, I hear. Offshore wind is still, regardless of the federal administration, an incredible initiative and achievement of Governor Murphy's agenda and of the BPU and the DEP and all of the organizations within state government that worked on this. Offshore wind is our key to getting more clean generation online and helping to reduce long-term costs, which I'm going to talk more about, I think, in our Q&A. It's really unfortunate that we are in a situation where we don't have a federal government that is supportive of offshore wind, because we know that it's not just about the reduction in carbon emissions and climate change when it comes to offshore wind. It is about the really once-in-a-lifetime economic development opportunity that offshore wind brings to the state of New Jersey. It's about generating energy in the United States. It's about making sure that we're stabilizing long-term costs for electricity, and we really do need to move forward with offshore wind in order to do all of those things. So, I don't want to say that we have a great amount of confidence that the federal government will turn around on their position, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't. They absolutely should be looking at offshore wind and what we've been doing in New Jersey as a way to generate energy and bring costs down for everybody in the United States. Thanks.
Commissioner, what have we done right, and what do we still need to do?
In 5 minutes? I'll tell you what we've done right. We've given folks like are sitting right over here from your Department of Environmental Protection the freedom and the empowerment to do their good work. I am so grateful for you all, truly. When I think about what have we done right, I think back to when I first came to DEP in 2018, and I was the chief counsel to Commissioner Catherine McCabe. And I asked her how she would measure progress, how she would measure the success of working on climate change. And the thing that she said was most important was getting real, tangible information to people, because if the residents of the state of New Jersey, who we all serve, don't understand the risks that we face, they don't understand the changes that we need to make, then we're just talking to ourselves about policy. And so I'm super proud that we have put out and continue to expand the New Jersey Specific Scientific Report on Climate Change so folks can see and understand the real granular implications for climate change here in New Jersey, right? And that's because of these folks right over here, that we are working continually to provide reporting on our greenhouse gas emissions inventory and updating our Global Warming Response Act reporting to the legislature to tell them what actions are necessary to take. And I think those are really critical points. And the same is true on the adaptation and resilience side of the house with our climate change resilience strategy and our resilience action plans. But of course, all the policy stewardship and thought leadership in the world is just sitting there on paper without the action to lift it up. And so I'm proud of the work we've done to implement our climate pollutant reduction regulatory reforms. We now have a cap on carbon from energy generating units in the state of New Jersey. That did not exist before. And so that is helping to reduce climate pollution from energy generating units at the same time that we have put forward regulations to improve emissions from cargo handling equipment, to advance the adoption of electric vehicles, all again because of the folks to my right. And then on the adaptation side, we've done considerable work in working with our communities in different parts of the state to advance resilience action planning through the Resilient NJ program led by our Chief Climate Resilience Officer, Nick Angarone. We've expanded our Blue Acres program to get folks out of dangerous areas But there is so much more work to do, including on regulatory reform. We enacted the Inland Flood Protection Rule to update our flood standards in riverine communities, and pending now for adoption later this year is our Resilient Environments and Landscapes, or REAL rule, to update our coastal land use policies and make other needed changes across the regulatory environment. And of course, we passed the most empowering environmental justice law in this country. But there is still so much more work to be done, and there's a long way to go. But I want to come back to what Commissioner McCabe said. In bringing information to people, motivating our neighbors to care about these issues and advance this policy in the way folks in this room do. Because without that action being sown on the ground, and I see some of you here that do that work every day, like the folks from Climate Revolution, so that work is so critically important, because if we are to advance the policies that we're all talking about here, we need public buy-in. And by and large, people in New Jersey, they believe in climate change, thank goodness, because you don't get to believe or not in science, it just is. But they believe in climate change. They expect that their government is tackling climate change, but they don't want to pay a damn thing for it, right? And that's important. We've got to help folks understand the network of investments and strategies that are critical to reducing emissions and advancing mitigation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we're going to get into a little bit of some moderated discussion, and we're definitely seeing some recurring themes, obviously, here. But a few more specifics. In just 8 months, you'll have a new governor. You'll have to prepare a transition report for them. If you were working on your transition reports today, what detailed advice would you give them about the top 3 to 5 priorities from your perspective that are important to move the needle, but again, both on mitigation and 3 to 5 on adaptation, if you would, please? Sure. President?
I have it. Yeah, so I think probably everyone in this room, if you have not heard, you will be hearing and seeing that electricity rates are going up in June as a result of primarily generation issues. New Jersey is part of PJM. The J in PJM stands for Jersey, and that's the regional grid operator, and they help support electrons moving across the region in states like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, but also Ohio, West Virginia, Virginia. So vastly different states and state policies. And so throughout the last 7 years, actually, under President Fiordaliso's leadership, New Jersey has been really urging PJM to take a more ambitious approach to getting clean energy projects online. And that has been a major struggle, even more so recently. They have an application queue of interconnection for New Jersey and other states, and there are 79 projects just in New Jersey, almost exclusively solar and storage, that are waiting for review at PJM. Those are the quickest projects that you can get online. Whether you support fossil fuel generation or you don't, the fact of the matter is, if we want to get more generation online and help stabilize costs, we need to get solar and storage projects out of that queue. So continuing the advocacy that New Jersey has done, Governor Murphy has been an incredible leader, the BPU staff who are technical experts. We have our energy chairman here, Chairman Smith. The legislature, has been pushing PJM as well. So continuing to push PJM to make getting generation online a big priority would be the number one thing I would say we want to do. We also need to be looking. Again, the generation costs are part of the equation. We need to be looking at all of our programs and making sure that anything that is supported by ratepayers that is balanced and that we are bringing costs down for everybody to the extent that we can do that, but also making sure that everybody can take advantage of the programs that we have. Obviously, everybody's not going to buy an EV. Maybe they don't even want to buy an EV. Not everybody is going to get rooftop solar. Not everybody is going to get, an electric heat pump, but we have to look across the board, as we have been in our clean energy programs, and ensure that they are available and accessible so that the costs of them are being equitably distributed amongst all of our utility customers. And then I would say, I think this is a kind of part of what Sean was saying. We have to continue to talk about these values and these goals and these targets in how they are going to reduce costs, because we are going to see cost increases associated, with these generation challenges that we're having. We are anticipating 17 to 22% increases, not anticipating, they are happening as a result of, these generation issues. So we have to do everything we can to get people into programs that lower costs and to make sure that they understand the value of these policies, not just for long-term cost mitigation associated with climate change, but also short-term direct benefits, financial benefits to the customer, the utility customers of New Jersey.
What she said. So what would the transition report say? I think it'll be a continuation of our to-do list. We're working on right now under leadership of our Chief Strategy Officer, Katie Angarone, who's here, by the end of the year, put out a State of the Environment report that will discuss the progress we've made over the last 55 years, because this year is the 55th birthday of Earth Day and your DEP. And what are the instructions for the future all across the media landscape in air, land, water, climate, flood regulation, so on and so forth. There's a critical piece of directional thought leadership that we'll be working on. But in terms of some concrete ideas that I would share with the next governor, the first would be let's do more to practice what we preach, and let's rely on our state government to lead by example and do more of the things that we are saying as a matter of policy and regulation that the private sector and individuals should do. For example, the state of New Jersey owns acres upon acres of closed landfills that are solar ready. Let's get utility scale solar built there immediately. There's enough closed landfill space to power probably 750,000 homes in the state of New Jersey. Let's get it done. Let's use Trenton as an example of how to do more climate smart management of buildings and real estate, right? Those are some real low-hanging fruit that this administration has not focused on, and that I believe the next governor should. Secondarily, I think that not secondarily, just as important, we have to put our money where our mouth and our hearts are, meaning that we have to look realistically at the cost of building resilience in this state and recognize that the federal government is, at this juncture, and likely for the next 4 years, not the reliable partner that it has been. And every resilience measure that we have advanced in this state is an outgrowth of disaster recovery dollars that, if you read the executive order that the president put out this week, he thinks the states should take responsibility for, not the federal government. Were that to come to pass, there would be no resilience spending in our state. And that's a big problem, because over the last decade, we've had 13 major declared disasters that have cost, $7 to $9 billion. If you've not read Rebuild by Design's Atlas of Disaster, it is critical reading. We need a secure funding source in order to advance resilience in this state. And there are some ideas pending out there, including by this great man here to my right, to help finance those necessary resilience improvements that with certainly, even with the work of the federal government as a reliable partner past, we have not been able to make the headway that we should. And I think that is a critical point of work. And so too across our natural landscape, right? Senator Smith has been moving on issues of forestry and forestry management. We need to look at that seriously and seriously fund investments in our natural landscape, which we largely do not do as a matter of state budgeting. And we've got to have an all of the above approach, not look at climate as energy, because it is not just energy, right? It is the natural and built environments as well, and we have to take that seriously.
Thank you, Commissioner. Continuing along that line of thinking, and also I think understanding the current budget situation we find ourselves in with the state, and then projected next year as well. In the past, we've seen some ideological flip-flopping on climate change as federal and state administrations change. Can you reflect on any current regional collaborations or national coalitions of states that currently exist or might be in the offing that would help secure movement on climate and energy in light of the current federal situation?
Sure. Well, I'll let Sean, maybe Sean wants to talk about RGGI as a regional collaboration. So in terms of the work of the BPU, we have been working with states throughout the region on transmission collaboration and coordination, right? We know that large-scale transmission projects throughout the region help support clean energy development and interconnection, but they come at a cost. And so we have been working with the Northeast States Collaborative to make sure that we are looking at the costs of transmission and the necessary improvements that we're doing for transmission infrastructure upgrades related to clean energy are supported by states throughout the region, right? The way that PJM has historically looked at transmission and continues to look at transmission to some extent is, states that have clean energy goals and targets and are bringing on clean energy projects are having to foot the bill for the transmission associated with those projects, even though the transmission might be benefiting states throughout the PJM region. So we are continuing to work with other states to push PJM to say, yes, there are PJM, very different footprint, right? Ohio's priorities around electricity are very different from New Jersey's priorities around electricity, but we know that large-scale transmission projects that are built to support things like offshore wind or utility-scale solar are good for the entire PJM region, and that they help support not just, additional clean energy, but load growth throughout the PJM region as well by doing those transmission upgrades. So it's really important that states throughout the region are helping to support financially those regional transmission upgrades that are beneficial financially to all the states and not just to the state that's developing a clean energy project. So we are continuing to work with states throughout our region to do that, and that's something that I think is, will be a big priority for not just for now, but for the next administration as well.
So I think one of the things that always gives me hope about this particular topic is the fact that when I'm engaging nationally or internationally, folks routinely come back to a refrain about the greater reliability, consistency, and potential for progress among subnational actors. And that is a continued theme when I'm engaging in those spaces. And so I think that makes programs like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative important to maintain our investment in, both as a function of our actual dollar investment, our time investment, but as a matter of our policy commitment to it. We tend to see among some states the sort of changing political winds affecting the involvement or disengagement from RGGI. But right now, we're in the process of negotiating the next program plan period, thing called program review in RGGI speak, with all of the participating states. And these issues of affordability, of reactivity to the outcome of a federal election, it affects things like that. And states that are pushing forward Last year, they're a little more reluctant this year to be more aggressive in our reduction, emissions reduction trend line through the RGGI program. I think that we're going to get to a good place and see a reduction in overall emissions over the next program period, but it truly does affect the involvement among the states, how folks in individual states feel, what the temperature out there is, really does impact those decisions as well. And sort of gets back to the point I made at the top about the need to engage our neighbors and beyond spaces like this so that decision makers are in a position to advance the ball along these lines in the way that thoughtful people like you organized around this room suggest we should. Because without that support, it can, that the progress on that policy can be in danger. You know, we routinely see states around this region come together and advance policy imperatives, right? Whether it's the Peg-Hanna-led consortium up and down the Eastern Seaboard in the Mid-Atlantic region to advance a heavy-duty, medium-duty vehicle charging corridor between Connecticut and Maryland, right? We see that collaboration among states, and that gives me hope, and nobody's backing away from that. Now, of course, that's federally funded, so we got to see how that plays out, and we'll be at the table or, at the bar, the one at the court, advancing our entitlement to those arguments of our entitlement to those resources. But I think we all need to be reminded of a political and a social reality, which is when times are hard, when folks feel beaten up at the cash register, at the grocery store, at the gas pump, hell, at the election booth, right? The issues that we're all here organized to talk about and make progress on, from a political perspective, they become less important, less of a focus. Oftentimes, environmental, climate issues, they become seen as the nice to have when the chips are down, right? Talk to your neighbors. You are the progress. We are the ones we need.
Thank you, Commissioner. On that note of getting out beyond these places and these spaces, and getting back, you also said taking the temperature, and then returning back to what Melissa said earlier, the hearts and the minds. So at times, municipalities have been at the forefront of responding and adapting to these issues around climate. We see with increasing cost, who pays for what, but also we see everyone in practice does benefit. We see them at the forefront of this, but they also can present local opposition to clean energy projects. See offshore wind. Or they also can help or not help when you have regulations that you're trying to enact that will help expand flood hazard areas. What are some of the keys to successful execution of these initiatives, and how can the state best collaborate with the people, with municipalities?
Oh dear. So, there are some municipal officials and communities in this state that are real leaders in advancing clean energy policy locally or in advancing resilience and adaptation. But I would be honest and tell you that those leaders are few, and that some of the greatest struggles that we encounter specifically in employing resilience policy tend to be at the local level. Folks are more disengaged at the local level from those policy considerations, and it can be harder to make progress. And there is an inclination toward a perspective that building resilience, adapting to climate change, mitigating climate emissions works more detriments locally than it provides benefits. And we sort of hear that routinely. And it could be issues of maintaining tree canopy, right, to both absorb carbon and reduce flooding, provide shade, It could be a reluctance to engage in stormwater maintenance and stormwater improvement, a reluctance to come to the BPU and have a conversation about a local microgrid that would really benefit your community, and certainly a reluctance to adapt forward-thinking flood control policies. And there's probably more, because there always is more, that we as state leaders can do to engage and encourage municipal leaders. But the way that I tend to think about this, and maybe it's easier for me to say this from the perspective that I do. I'm not a person who runs for office, put my name on a ballot, have people decide if they like me or not. That's never been for me. But folks who do put their names on ballots, they worry about, good stormwater control being called a rain tax, and they don't think further beyond that. Or they tend to think, oh, if we have to elevate homes or buildings to avoid flood conditions, that's going to be necessarily a detriment to my ability to expand economic growth in my community. And I think we have to do more from a state perspective to help people understand the facts, right? That how much you invest in these things have a direct relationship to the long-term health of your community and its growth prospects. But again, it's easy for me to say that, right? It's our job in environmental management and protection to think longer than everybody else. And I think, it's probably not inappropriate to ask local leaders to, think beyond the next ballot or the next budget, right? That's certainly what we have to do in the work that we perform. And we have to have a little bit of faith, right? Faith that the investments we make today will show their benefits, right? That they will help to empower and leave behind a more resilient, more climate-ready community, right? We have to think about our kids and the communities that they inherit. And again, it's easy to say, but I think harder to do, and harder to do when you're an elected official.
So I'll just add to that. In the experience that we've had, particularly with offshore wind and some of the local opposition, I echo everything Sean said, and being a local elected official is challenging. And even in my own community, I see some of the challenges that they experience having friends in those positions. But I do think that, a lot of the opposition around offshore wind at the local level was somewhat of a red herring and really came out of a lot of misinformation issues, particularly with some of the transmission questions that we were getting, through our own public processes and some of the opposition around transmission. If you are ideologically opposed to offshore wind because of view shed or property value issues, and you hear that there's a transmission project in your community, then that's, that becomes somewhat of a red herring for being opposed to any sort of electricity transmission. There are projects, there are natural gas pipelines and electricity transmission and distribution projects happen all over the state of New Jersey all the time. And so I think, what's important as we are in a bit of a holding pattern, if you will, based on the federal government, is that we really, educate communities and help them to understand, what these projects are and what they mean for the community. Because at the end of the day, it is important. We want to have community engagement on these issues that Sean's referring to around adaptation. We want to have community engagement on the proactive planning of things like transmission. And so educating communities and talking about the benefits and making sure that they're aware of what's going on. And I think we did a pretty good job of that at the BPU with our transmission project that was connecting onshore. But at the end of the day, there are going to be people who are just ideologically opposed, and a lot of that is unfortunately political. So we have to talk to the people who are being affected and try to make sure that we're providing the best information possible about these kinds of projects.
Thank you. I feel like it can be frustrating, but you can still, I think, see some light at the end of the tunnel. I was, I think, both frustrated but also challenged positively when I heard that it went from, I think she said, 80 to 50% after the one sentence about whales. And I think that there's, again, some frustration there, but also some reality that we can change that if we can, get our together a little bit more on our messaging. I think I'm going to try to integrate what I'm thinking is the biggest barrier, and I'm going to ask true faults and why. So I feel like the biggest barrier is education and comprehension of the issues, and it's both at the community issue, but it's also at the stakeholder issue, stakeholder level. I don't know how many rounds of joint hearings he stepped out, but we're going to have in the Senate and the Environment, Senate and the Assembly about energy. So understanding grid modernization is one thing. Understanding grid scale energy storage is even another thing. But when it comes to understanding the benefits at a community level, is that the biggest barrier that we have here? And how? How do we fix this?
So I guess true false is education the biggest barrier? Is that kind of the question? Yeah, I think that's true to some extent particularly for energy regulation issues, right? Prior to a few months ago, most people never heard of PJM. Right. I mean, I think that's not a judgment on anyone. We actually don't want utility customers to have to know what PJM is. The goal is just turn your lights on and it works at an affordable cost, right? But the fact of the matter is we know from the work of the regulatory agency, the Board of Public Utilities, that PJM's market drove costs up 10 times last year than the previous year, and PJM's projections continue to drive costs up. Yes, there is a need for more generation, and that is something that cannot be understated. It is important. We have to get more generation online, and particularly clean generation. But the education about how this all works. We don't produce all our electricity in New Jersey. We can't just go it alone. At the end of PJM's borders, there's not like a wall where all of the transmission lines just stop. Right? They go even further into Canada, and so there is a really significant education component when it comes to energy regulation and just even what goes into the cost of utilities. Right? The cost of generation, procuring electricity, that is the vast majority of the cost of everyone's utility bill, and it is outside the purview of the Board of Public Utilities and outside the regulatory authority of the state of New Jersey. And so that is a really important thing for people to understand when they say, clean energy is it's the priorities of this administration, right? How often do we hear that? The clean energy priorities of Governor Murphy are driving up the costs of electricity. We know that actually clean energy helped to suppress the generation costs that we are seeing, and will continue to do that. And so that is particularly important. But we also know that is a very small part, a sliver of your electric bill compared to the entirety of it, and compared to the generation. And so I think that is a major educational hurdle that, as decision makers, we really need to get people over. The average person, the average customer, still should not have to know what PJM is.
True.
Nothing further.
I mean, I think I'd just add to what Christine said with a reflection from my own space, because in a way it doesn't matter if we're talking about electricity or clean drinking water or flood control and climate resilience. People by and large expect that a lot of things just happen, right? Right? The clean water, it magically comes when you turn on the tap. The dirty water magically goes away after it falls or is flushed, right? So too is the case with the energy that it just goes on when we turn on the lights. And we're all so detached from the details and the nuance of what makes our many of our largely comfortable lives so comfortable, right? And that's a good thing until it's not, right? Until our infrastructure is crumbling and massive investments are needed because they've been for decades long delayed. We have to do more to include folks. No, they shouldn't have to know about the details, but folks will easily attach the cost of water or electricity and say they shouldn't have to pay more because their property taxes are already too high, right? We just sort of mix all these things together in our sort of civic society, and we need to do a better job of informing folks, right? We don't pay the real cost of electricity or the real cost of water or the real cost of food. All those things are subsidized for us, and they all need improvements.
Thank you. I think the real cost is a scary thing when we talk about transition and the clean energy transition. So I'd like to ask for each of your maybe favorite projects that you think. I think about Commissioner electric school buses, things like that, or scale energy storage or things like that. But just one project that each of you think we could do more when it comes to comprehension and education. I know that real cost is a struggle, and if we have real cost and understanding is already the issue, then how do we continue to pay more money for things like electric school buses, or what we're hearing is billions or more letters there, like with T's involving terabytes and trillions when it comes to grid scale and large scale projects like this?
So I don't know that I have a favorite project. But I do think that those of you who know me know I talk about community solar a lot. I do think that has been such a shining example of what we've tried to do in this administration around clean energy, right? It is a program that is, at full capacity, will be available to most residents, hopefully in the state of New Jersey. It will provide a bill credit to all residents. It is geared towards low and moderate income residents, and it is about developing clean energy and helping to reduce our contribution to climate change. So I think that's probably my favorite program that we do at the Board of Public Utilities. But I do want to point out about educating people about kind of misinformation about the things that we do. I'm not sure this is the best segue, but I think it's important. So the BPU put out, we actually accepted a report on equity and affordability in rates at our last board meeting. And it had several recommendations, and we put out a straw proposal yesterday following the report acceptance to expand the USF program, the Universal Service Fund program, which is the main state program for bill credits, bill assistance, income eligible bill assistance. And we also included, as part of the proposal, requiring the utilities to meet certain enrollment obligations, because only 20% of the eligible USF population is actually enrolled in the program. So it's open to anyone at 60% of state median income or less, but only about 20% of that population is enrolled, so getting the utilities to enroll. So we put this out, and there was a tremendous amount of opposition messaging calling it DEI utility rates. And so I think that we really, I obviously am supportive of DEI initiatives as a whole, right? But the very specific thing that we're talking about is giving people more money for bill assistance, particularly those people who are on the low and low middle income scale, and actually requiring utilities to have some obligation to do that. I'm somewhat familiar with the definitions around DEI. I don't think that falls into that, but we have to really challenge these kinds of things, because if everything that we do as an administration, or as me as the BPU president, or Sean, everything that we do, if it supports low and moderate income residents, is somehow negative, we're never going to see eye to eye, right? That's kind of my position on that. So I think that's I'll get off my soapbox about that one.
I don't have a favorite project, but I think that demonstration is everything. And that we as government have an opportunity, right? Particularly when it comes to deploying what might be to the ordinary person or in the free market a more expensive proposition. We have an opportunity to make that investment ourselves, to show folks that it works and to grow it to scale. And I think we need to do much more of that in the years ahead, so that folks can see, touch, and feel what change is like and not be scared by it. And I think the DEP team has a great couple of examples, because they lead through this demonstration approach in ways that some folks may not know, like Helene Barr and her team in using RGGI to deploy natural climate solutions, whether that's restoring salt marsh or expanding urban forestry, or Peg Hanna, and as you know from Isles, the Go Trenton e-mobility program. Right? I think government needs to do a lot more, and I won't stop talking about all that landfill space that should be covered in solar panels, right? Or all those government building rooftops. So I think we need to really lean into that, because we can show folks how to make that transition and adopt those technologies if we're willing to do it ourselves first.
Thank you. I think that was really clear, and I think would help folks if we could somehow get that across. I am going to be conscious of time and turn it over to my co-moderator here. Kim Scarborough has been monitoring the audience submissions online and has some questions for us, I believe, but if not, I have plenty more. Kim, I'll turn it over to you.
So I have a question. Do you think planning for walkable, bikeable cities is largely underrepresented as a policy solution in reducing carbon emissions? And if so, what needs to be done to kind of achieve these smart growth principles?
Yes, it's underrepresented, unquestionably. And I think, like anything else in this space of climate mitigation and adaptation, it needs a greater degree of coordinated governance from every level, from the federal to the state to the county to the local, where everybody has some skin in the game to make those things happen. Otherwise, what you see in that space is pretty scattershot or concentrated. Places that have the resources to really invest in that, you see more of, Hoboken, Jersey City, for example, and then you see less of that focus elsewhere. And it is underrepresented, and it needs more focus, attention, and financing.
Next question. Are there current concerns for natural gas generation to be prioritized over clean energy projects in the queue?
So I'm not sure there are concerns. The Q pipeline for New Jersey is almost exclusively, if not exclusively, solar and storage. And we know that's the fastest generation that can get online, whether you like clean or natural gas generation. It's still the fastest to get solar and storage online. There's certainly some conversations about new fossil generation happening, I think in the legislature and around the utility space. But it's a 5 to 7 year endeavor to get a new natural gas plant interconnected in the PJM system in New Jersey. And so we have, again, we have 79 projects in the queue, some of which have been sitting there since 2021 that are solar and storage that I think we need to be focusing on as the first line of defense to get more generation online.
Keep going. Okay, this one's a doozy. Should New Jersey drop out of PJM and set it up as its own ISO like New York and California? Would that be cost effective?
That's not the first time I've heard that lately. Listen, New Jersey is when we have high energy demand, we have to import electricity into the state. And without offshore wind coming online, in the near term, I can't see a scenario where just New Jersey going it alone would even be, technically feasible, let alone cost effective. It's certainly a question that we've, been thinking about. And when President Fiordaliso was president, we talked about it, then because of the challenges that we had with PJM and their kind of leaning towards traditional fossil and very transmission-heavy decision making. I think if other states were willing to join, if it were PJM and that was it, Pennsylvania is a net exporter, a pretty significant net exporter of electricity. Maybe that's more technically feasible. I don't know that Pennsylvania would want to do it, or it would be cost effective for them to be in a smaller RTF than PJM. But we have to do something, right? We have been doing a lot of things. I think it's such a technical issue, and so much of it happens within a public process, but not a highly publicized public process. So a lot of the work that gets done at PJM, from the state utility commissions and consumer advocates and NGOs, and then also at FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, a lot of that happens without people knowing about it. So, we have been very strongly advocating for PJM queue reform for several years. We have been advocating for the PJM market to actually reflect supply and demand and not some artificially constructed market, which I think a lot of the rules that PJM has had over the years have created an artificial scarcity, which has driven prices up. So we have done all of those things. I think now it's just making sure that there's that's being done in a much more public way, even though again it's a public process. But as all of you know, not everyone engages in public processes. So thanks.
Anything else, Kim? Thank you. I think we're just about, if I'm doing my math correctly, on correct timing, maybe for one or two last statements. I know that the EMP modeling results are out, if you want to have any comments on that or not. And then I know there's several other things that you've released as well. I know the Heat Island initiative just came out. I was really excited to see that. But last comments, I think, before we maybe break for lunch.
Sure. So, yep, the EMP modeling came out, and we as an administration have extended the stakeholder comment period because it is a complicated assessment to do and to figure out how to move forward. And I know there were some comments about the federal government's action or inaction and how it relates to the state's energy master plan. But if we want to be realistic about our ability to get to 100% clean by 2035, we want to be realistic about the costs associated with it, which is incredibly important, then we need to take into consideration the federal policies and programs that may or may not be available in order for us to get to our goals. And so, we are doing that as at the BPU, we're doing that, in consultation with our department, other departments, and the governor's office. And so we are, really interested in feedback about how we can achieve our goals under, the current scenario, the current climate around the federal government, and do it in a way that is as cost effective as possible.
I think one of the things that's been on my mind a lot in the last 2 months, it feels like 2 years, that has been on my mind a lot is looking not just at the headlines about retrenchment in policy spaces like this one, rather than just looking at those headlines with a dread and a frustration, because it is frustrating when the chief environmental regulator for our country says things like, we are going to drive a dagger through the heart of the climate change religion. I never read that in the mission of the Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm pretty familiar with our environmental legal system. While it can be frustrating and disappointing, I've found renewed energy in this moment. I don't think I've ever been as energized and exhausted at the same exact time. And I want to leave you all with a message to really use that, right? Because we, in this moment, have the space to do a lot of good, right? A lot of convincing our neighbors and our friends that this stuff matters, right? That we can't stay in a place where energy is dirty and we are sitting ducks for the next storm, or hell, just a bad thunderstorm, right? And that we have a lot of opportunity to make change right at the local level, and that it really matters, right? We're talking about a lot of big propositions up here. PJM, separate RTO, right? Community solar, utility scale solar, right? There is no one silver bullet for this stuff, right? Climate change policy, mitigation, or adaptation, it is not one thing. It is a million little things, right? Find your 10 little things, because doing them matters, right? Sitting around rooms like this and talking about the big policy propositions, right, is important. So is that really granular, really local, really neighborhood action, right? Put your time and your energies and your investments there. I know I will.
Thank you both, President Gul-Savoy and Commissioner LaTourette, for taking time out of your busy schedules today. We do sincerely appreciate it. And I also want to do a special welcome to the 35 students that are here under scholarship. Welcome. And thank you as well, Kim. I think it's time to wrap up. So thank you again for your time. Quick announcement before we break for lunch. Lunch is outside on the concourse, and you can bring your lunch in here to eat. You can access the buffet through the front or the back doors of this room. And then please take the 5 minutes during lunch, if you have not already done so, to give us your feedback by visiting the timelines and the flip charts located on the concourse just outside the room near the registration desk. There are navigators around the room and in that comment gallery around by the registration table who can assist you with that. Our Legislative Reflections panel will begin at 1 p.m. sharp. Enjoy your lunch.